back to another month of the Ampliverse Book Club. We are back here again. This month, we read the novel Black Boy Out of Time by Hari Ziyad. We are back again with another episode of the Ampliverse Book Club. So let me introduce you to the book club hosts using pull quotes from our book today. So moving, so alive, so real. It's RJ. Hello, that's me.
That is you.
Thank you. A rare mix of balladry, criticism, and reportage. Allie, hello.
Hi.
Hi, very well versed, multifaceted. And finally, cuts deep but also provides healing. It's Catherine. Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, welcome back. Like I said, we are discussing the book Black Boy Out of Time by Hari Ziyad. And let's just dive right into it. We chose this book because we wanted to obviously pick something to celebrate Black History Month, and I feel like we picked a really good, very modern approach to uh a, a book and learning about Black history. And I will want to start there, like really start talking about the book's form. This is Hari Ziyad's debut novel. He's a writer for Race Baiter and other essays, and like writing online. But this was kind of like their first foray into kind of building a narrative. And so the book's form is very much kind of like a combination of memoir, but also with like these anecdotes that are, of current events and also in history that I wanted to, ask the group, like, how did you feel about kind of diving into this really new hybrid memoir form, you know?
As I typically do, started out audiobook, and I also got the Kindle version so that I could take notes because that works better
Mm.
for me to talk into my phone, into the Kindle app in my phone,
Oh,
and I just talk to it, and then I can go back and edit as I need to. But then I have the
interesting.
notes where they belong, and then I can export them. So when I was exclusively listening to the audiobook, I did get confused when the letters
Mm.
started to happen. And I heard them mention, their therapist suggested talking to themselves as a child, their inner child. But I didn't quite get it until I was like, oh, okay, I see with my eyes. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will admit I was taken off guard because I really felt as if it just began. There was no
Yeah.
preamble, there was no welcome to my life, here's how this book is going to go. It began. And so I definitely think that it's evident that they have a history in essays and in writing more of an essay format. I think that kind of came through,
Mhm.
whereas um and it's hard not to do like a comparison when it's really apples and oranges, but having just come off of Queen Mariah Carey's memoir, which was
Absolutely.
much more of like a traditional memoir of like,
Yeah.
here's kind of like a linear, not super like 100%, but here's a more linear. And so coming into this, it was an adjustment for me, and
Yeah.
of just finding, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, totally. And it was really interesting going through it and seeing like footnotes and like, oh, like you're actually like, and they have a full like a bibliography at the end also, like having all of the the research and the references and the references in current events that they were making the entire novel. It was so like, oh, this is like a work, like I have to like uh they did the great job of kind of backing up all of the claims. That what I thought was really interesting, being able to connect the things that there was happening in their life growing up into actual socio-economic political like events that kind of spoke even to like the wider community. And there, I really liked that there was always a connection between like what they were experiencing in their day-to-day life and how this, like, either one instance or you know how they think translates into like the larger community, which I thought was really good. But yeah, I do agree. There was definitely like work put into it, and I felt like I had to really slow down at times and have to think about like, the transition from talking about a specific memory, talking about the feelings and the emotions, and then being able to, put it in context in the larger world was very much like they are doing so much work here that I have to really sit and take
Right.
it.
And like you said, Allie, they really did just hit the ground running. Even
Mhm.
because I did, since I did the audiobook, it started with the prologue, and I wouldn't necessarily always read the prologue if we're going to be honest, but
Yeah.
I listened to it, and I really was immediately with the metaphor of the fly, like talking
Mhm.
about how flies are just dying with us, kind of, because they're attracted to our dead cells. I immediately was like, oh, we're going in. This is going to be a very deep book, and it really was. There was a lot. And the first time that I really, and this probably wasn't the first time that they did this in the book, but the
Mhm.
first time that I really noticed that was when they talked about seeing the subway turnstile jumper. And then they talked about the
Yeah.
cost of renovating the subway and how it shouldn't have cost that much based on what it costs in other countries.
Mhm.
And they talked about how turnstile jumping crime went up, and all of that around that one moment of seeing an individual stopped by,
Yeah.
the subway police. I was just like, man, it was just so, I can imagine how overwhelming that must be for somebody that's taking these things into consideration as they live their daily life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would like to talk more about kind of how they did set up the book, which was in three codas. So they've really put their life in these three big, I just like themes, topics, like that shaped who they are today. Um, and it's not necessarily linear as it goes through, but definitely kind of like it feels more like an onion. Like it's definitely like they keep widening and widening. It starts with the really core issue and then kind of how it pervades through their life. So the three codas are black, queer, and free. And black definitely at the core. Um, Hari Ziyad actually coins a term in the book called misaphopedia, which is derived kind of like the misogynoir, like the misogyny faced by Black women. Misaphopedia he coins as the anti-Black disdain for children and childhood that Black youth experience. And this really is kind of like the core of the book, that Black children um, are socialized and taught to basically be anti-Black and try not to perform a certain way, to not be seen as like the you know the wayward like Black I don't know, like what socialized like pariah or status that they may get growing up. So kind of training those like those anti-Black um things like early on in life. And I think that really was the impetus to structure the book too, of like the chapters alternate so that every other chapter is a letter to his inner child. Hari Gor
Harigora.
Hari Gora, thank you. Catherine listened to the audiobook, so
Yes, gives me the pronunciation.
the pronunciation,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, yeah, you're welcome. I also, it also talks about the theft of Black childhood, which we
Yeah.
all see in the news. And
Yeah.
he brings up children like Tamir Rice was murdered, and the police officer that murdered him said, "Oh, I thought he was at least 25, and this is a 12-year-old."
Yeah.
So it's something that we are taught as a society as we grow. Like we are misinformed that this child is an adult, and that causes them real danger,
Mhm.
that we as not Black people cannot understand, which is much later in the book something that he talks about.
Yeah, totally.
I think uh, I think that I was glad for him to put a name to that, to the Misafropedia, and I thought
Yeah.
that some of the examples that they give, I thought one of the most clear cut was when they were talking about being in school, and that kind and there was an interaction in the hallway between one of their classmates, well, two of their classmates, and one of
Mm-hmm.
them was white and one was black, and they just kind of automatically sided with the white classmate.
Yeah.
And I thought that that study, the internal study that they made, and kind of looked back on it, and they were like, well, why would I have automatically assumed that, the black classmate and friend of theirs was the
Mm-hmm.
aggressor in the situation. And I thought that that was a very I thought it kind of illuminated the point perfectly. And
Yeah.
it was just
Yeah.
one of those clear cut examples where, I can think of plenty of times in my life when situations like that have arisen, and that have called me to take a step back. And I can think of plenty of times when I was reading this book. I'll be completely honest with you, this was probably one of the most challenging books that I have read.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of times when I was sitting and I was like having to really ask myself, is this a criticism of the book, or am I feeling threatened?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that I was, of anything in this book, I was I it was really important to me to have kind of shed the light on that idea of
Mm-hmm.
Misafropedia. I think was what I probably took the most from this.
Yeah. I know it's not, it's definitely apples to oranges too, but like there is a little bit of that I can see too, like with my experience of, especially just growing up, like, being a minority, and that idea of like you have to be excellent, and you have to kind of, and already as a child, like it breeds like a hostile environment when you are with other um like other kids, with the same background as you. And so yeah, that example definitely, like, when he talked about the about Betty's experience, yeah, like there was like hostility between them, because she was always seeing Hari as the like ideal, and there was always like the ideal black child, like black kid in the school, and Betty was like the bad black student in school, and there was already that kind of like thing that they had to kind of work against. And later, obviously, like they ended up developing a friendship together, and they were like, yeah, that's how I saw you, that's how we saw each other when we were kids. And that's just something that we were already like innately had to feel and like see ourselves as.
Yeah, and Ibermex Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist brings up the same thing. He talks about racism within the Black community,
Yeah.
and he also talks about his parents. So it's interesting because Hari Gora's parents seem a step further down the road
Yeah.
than Ibermex Kendi's parents, because Kendi talks about his parents pushing him. They're doing exactly what you're talking about, pushing him. You have to be the best. Like, you have to
Hmm.
prove yourself essentially as worthy of existence, which is stupid.
Yeah.
But it's what they were taught, and it's what we're all taught,
Hmm.
that people of color have to rise above, and that's bullshit, that we put that onto them. um, so that's definitely a parallel that I saw. Whereas with Hari Gora's parents, their parents, they had a more evolutionary view of race and
Hmm.
religion. But well, and I'm sure I don't know that we want to go this far next, but like this quickly, but not of gender. They got partway
Yeah.
there, but they just couldn't go all the way with this understanding of non-binary, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word, and I don't mean that just in the gender sense.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really like, to be candid, also, like, this was also very challenging for me, I think, in a good way, because it really did help me kind of think about a lot of things that I really haven't thought about in a long time. And one of them is like their spirituality and their religion. Hari even says it, that like that's their, scapegoat answer, is like, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, but they're like, I don't really know what that means. That's just like an answer I give. And like, to be candid, I didn't even write in the notes a lot about the spirituality, even though that's still very much a big portion of the book. Hari grew up in a Hare Krishna community through their mother and grandmother, but their father's side was raised Muslim. So he had these two kind of like opposing things that all kept culminating also with the fact that they were living a Black experience. And so there was even those examples of, Hare Krishna communities like not allowing their family in their communities because they were Black, even though they were very much like prominent figures in the Black Hare Krishna community,
Right.
which it like always keeps funneling into like that the Black experience almost trumps so many things, that the small avenues and nuances in their life of exploring their gender and even like their religion and spirituality always kind of has to be defaulted to, well, you are a Black person, so
Right.
your
Well, and
experience will be different.
yeah, I mean, just so that you guys know you're not alone. I also it was a tough read, and for me the
Yeah.
thing that I had to keep saying to myself was I am not supposed to fix this.
Yeah.
Like that was like the mode that I immediately went into as I was reading, in particular the first section of the book. I
Yeah.
was like, this is terrible and horrible. How can I fix it? And I was like, wait, I am bearing witness. That
Yeah.
is my job right now. My job right now is to listen and to learn. I don't need to be going into fix it mode. And I also found it in and I didn't notice this until I got into the second section of the book,
Mhm.
but I found in the first section of the book that I had a difficult time relating, because this is not an experience that I have because I am a white woman. And
Mhm.
I noticed it because as soon as we shifted into the queer section of the book, I saw myself
Yeah.
so much. And I was like, this is so much easier to read. And I was like, why? Why is
Yeah.
that? And so that was the kind of the critical moment that I had was, man, it is difficult. Even though I want to learn and I
Mhm.
want to help, it's still hard for me to relate because I
Yeah.
haven't lived that experience. And so because it's difficult to relate, it's difficult to listen to.
Yeah. I think the main one really from the first coda, and as it like they keep going back to it through, is that carceral gaze. I think like even seeing the word on its own, carceral, was like such a new thing for me and such a shift, because I think we always see incarcerated, incarceration, but actually like distilling the thing of like having the gaze of, you teach your children by being, by it's like scared straight, like you teach children and you create these social rules by using like the fear tactic of going to prison, which for the Black community is a real thing. Like that is something that it's almost like a default for a lot of Black experiences, that is a reality. And even like just talking about how many in his family were incarcerated for so many various things, like was such an eye-opening experience. Especially the story about his cousin Eric was definitely like obviously one of the big ones, but um even like telling the story about like during his cousin Eric's like hearing, it was like their defendant like said like all of the things that led up to like the environment that he was in. And it really made me think about like, yeah, like that, how do you pass judgment and punishment when these people are just having to act because they are just a product of something that they had no control of because of who they were
Because of
born as, or
decades
yeah.
of trauma,
Yeah.
decades of trauma. Yeah. And I mean, talking about I lost my train of thought. Oh, talking about so many Black people being sent to prison and that being a
Mm-hmm.
threat. It's when you think about, he makes a comment talking about Paul, which was the other kid in the hallway. It was Paul and
Yeah.
Betty. Paul was the white boy, and how the state funnels all of its help, into the Pauls of the world. And
Mm-hmm.
they talk about the opioid crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and how the opioid crisis, when it's a white person, it's, oh, this is an addiction, this is terrible, and when it's a Black person, it's a crime.
Yeah.
And that is, there's nothing clearer than that when you talk about systematic racism.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really challenging to read through it and go through it, but I think it was really cool to like to have at least a live person to kind of follow along. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely not just like reading a nonfiction book. You're reading a
Right.
person go through these experiences in their life and like
We're bearing, like I said, we're bearing
yeah,
witness. That's really
yeah,
what we're doing when we read a memoir from a Black person that has
yeah,
gone through this experience. We're bearing witness to their experiences, and I think that is the least that we can do as
yeah,
people who are not Black people.
yeah. I definitely shifting gears to the second coda, queer, which Catherine you've already started talking about, but yeah, like there is a little bit of hope in here too, especially when Hari starts kind of developing their expression and sexuality, um but having kind of like those really tough kind of guardians, those blockers, especially from his dad, uh to to help provide that. I mean, like like the story definitely relates, right? Like you kind of meet your first Hari talks about their first boyfriend Michael, which like it was like such a really relatable experience of like that feeling of like your first love of just you don't really know what to do, you just want to like be close to them and like spend all day, like all night talking to them. And even like
So
the way,
relatable.
yeah, like the way he even described was like, I didn't know, I just wanted to like hold him, like I don't
And he
even
was
know like
like, it's like we're brothers. That
yeah,
was so, like, I feel like I said the exact sentence to my first crush. I was like, it's like you're my sister. Like,
yeah,
because you're identifying that within yourself too.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
relatable. And that was just such a huge shift from the first
I know.
coda, to go from like, man, this is tough and this is hard and I don't understand it. I'm listening, but man, and then to, whoa, like everything. I'm like, dang, it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And what I really loved about the queer coda was that I felt like Hari really got to dig into a lot of the imagery. The one that I wrote down was the button-up shirt metaphor. He like had a full chapter basically where he felt he had to wear this button-up shirt to a funeral, right?
Funeral.
Yeah.
A wedding and then a funeral.
Yes.
Both.
And just being able to describe that, like, I feel like I am putting this on, like, physically, and also, like, it's just easier to, like, have to not tell everyone in my, like, to go, even, like, some of the cousins that are like, oh, are you seeing any girls? Like, it's just easier to just say yes or, like, ignore it than to have to, like, actually open up and explain it. And there's what I love about the writing is that even as they decide all of those things, there's so much criticism on themselves to be like, I'm actively doing this and that's probably wrong and that's probably like, making this worse. But like when you're in those situations, like why would I why would I invest the time to like try to tell my cousins about, my partner or New York and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
very relatable for me too. Like I literally
Yeah.
do that with my
Yeah.
family all the time.
The day that I read that chapter, we went to see Frozen at Dr. Phillips, and I got dressed, and I like wearing dresses. Like, I don't feel
Mhm.
like I'm putting on a dress because society expects me to. Like, I typically wear what I like to wear.
Mhm.
Well, I have been, as I'm sure you have been around for this before, RJ, I have been shamed about my shoes before because I like a comfortable shoe. I like a Sperry. I like a boat shoe, ladies and gentlemen. So I had on some white ballet flats with I had a white dress for to go see Frozen. And I was like, these are hurting my toes. I am not going to wear them. And I changed, and they were boots. They were Sperry boots, but they were boots. So I changed my shoes. I was like, I'm not going to wear this because it's what I need to wear with this outfit. That's stupid.
Yeah.
I'm going to wear something that I'm going to be comfortable in. And
Yeah.
I fully did that because I read this chapter, because I was like, wait, I'm doing the same damn thing.
That is so funny. I will say, like, Hari's like kind of how they're trying to figure out their non-binary like expression and everything. It honestly made me think about like what are the things that I what are the socialized things that I have always taken into, like what it means to be masculine or feminine or to be gay, and like do I actually agree with those things? Like if I had my choice of like pick figure what I want to connect with, and yeah, it made me think about that today, like a couple days ago, like yeah, like why do I want to look a certain way or like want to dress a certain way? Is it really because I want to, or is it because I'm expected to, and I just have always been like, yeah, I wouldn't be like, I think right now, me personally, like nail polish is the closest thing I could do, but like what if like and it's not like I'm saying I am, but it's just I've always like just put those things of like, yeah, it's just always been like gendered for me. And them going through their journey has really kind of helped open my eyes of like it it's all relative, like it's all just things that have been told for you to do. Yeah.
I feel like I don't have a lot to say here, and I'm not trying to be a dick about it. Like
Yeah.
I think in reading it, I've always been a person, and I don't know like who to credit this for, but like I've always been a person where I'm like, being a woman means whatever the fuck I want it to mean.
Yeah.
I've never, and I consider myself to be very like grateful that I've not struggled with that concept, but I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
for me it was a learning experience to be able to see it laid out so clearly, and like
Mhm.
to be able to kind of experience through their life and their story what that struggle was like, because it's not something that I've and I think again, I think the benefit of this book for me was that it was so much of, this is not a perspective that I'm getting day to day.
Yeah.
And so again, like that was just a really big value for me in reading this, was like, oh, okay, yes, okay, now I get it now. Like
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, and like thank you again,
Right.
Catherine, like you were saying, like just like bearing witness and being like, thank
Yeah.
you for putting this out there and for
Mhm.
allowing me to hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really what literature is all about. Like that's why I fell in love with literature and why I wanted to be a high school English teacher, because when
Mm.
you read books, that's the purpose. The purpose of reading books is to see the world through someone else's lens that you can't, because you're not that person.
Yeah.
And the first time that I had that experience was actually, well, I mean, I'm sure I had it before, but the first time that I had that experience and knew that that's what was happening is when I read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And when I read that, I was like, this is so different than anything that I've ever read, anything that I've ever even thought about.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I would never have seen or heard of anything like this had I not read this book.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I was like, oh, that's what this is for. That's the point,
Mhm.
So and talking about RJ, thinking about how their questioning of their gender expression and all of um, to me, it's throughout the book, non-binary is a theme. Like I
Yeah.
said, not just in gender, and I this is like my last note after I finished the book. I felt like at the end, there was this moment where they were talking about bad things that happened to them, and the people that did them weren't necessarily bad people, and how
Yeah.
we can't discuss uh, essentially you can't discuss healing, because if you try to call someone's behavior out, they're punished. And it's not that they deserve to be punished, it's that the person harmed deserves to be healed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that, to me, I was like, man, so many of our problems in society are because we've been conditioned as human beings to put things into categories, like to
Yeah.
black or white, like particularly binary, one or the other categories. And it's like, men or women, black or white. Is it good or bad? And life is a lot more complicated than that. And that's really what I learned from this book, because I was thinking about it and I was like, man, I kind of pride myself on trying to learn more about things that I don't know. And I've not considered how much is a binary issue, how much is an issue between having two choices. And even when it comes down to our politics, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. And if you're anything in between, sorry, that won't work. And it's like, but life is more complicated. So anyway.
Yeah. Man, like a page out of my therapist's book today. She was our thing today was like, things aren't just boxes you can check. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why I keep forcing things to like have to fit in a certain box that I can just easily check off. Because it's like I will always keep looking for things to check off. And that's definitely I do think it's interesting, and I think we could go into the last coda from what you were saying of like um free is the last coda, and we've talked about the carceral gaze, and that idea has really pervaded throughout the book, and also like in Hari's case, like really just defines the Black experience in this country very deeply. And um there's that idea of like freedom, almost like at what cost, because it's like you're always there's always something that can like judge you. Or I think it Hari puts it really vividly when they talk about like when the experiences of like they're worried for someone, and you want to make sure they're okay, and you want to call the cops just to see if they're okay. But there have been stories of like that has happened, and the cops ended up shooting that person that they were called for. And like there's the struggle of like living under that fear, but at the same time there is like a a socialized feeling that like you have to be secure, and that is the answer to feel like secure and safe. And they really challenge that as something that like how making those decisions, how is that possible? And like he even like actively does it. Like there's an example that he does where his partner basically says like, let's go check in on them.
Right. Yeah. There's a type of therapy. It's called dialectical behavior therapy. And there's a lot to it. It's way more complicated than I could ever explain myself, because I'm not like, a professional, though I have done dialectical behavior therapy. But the whole kind of the idea is having things that seem contradictory at the same time and allowing them to exist. That's part of it. Because as we have discussed, a lot of people have a hard time with it's either this or that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the therapy. And I think what you're talking about is like, there's this quote, and it's one of the ones that I pulled, that says he's talking about Hari's talking about their dad. I hate when daddy changes the subject after being presented with his contradictions, because it was he who showed me how powerful it could be to acknowledge the doubts that our contradictions raise. It was he who taught me that no matter how right I might think I am, I should always be willing to be wrong for something greater. And it is a very cerebral idea that takes a lot of sinking in. Like, I'm still trying to grasp it, but that's part of the problem, is that a lot of people aren't willing to sit with that discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, like that's definitely something that I feel like a lot of us have to go through, especially because the world is filled with so much discomfort right now. Like there's literally, and like it's so hard to not personalize that or like let it affect you in real life or like feel a certain sort of like guilt, right? Like to like what you said, like you want to try and fix it, but like that's I can't. I am one person. Like
Right.
even Hari, who really does a good job of laying all of these things out, doesn't actively be like, I'm not here trying to solve these problems. It's really just, trying to do their best and last as long as they can, which
Hmm.
that's just the name of the game of life. And
Right.
it's like once you realize that, it's just like, yeah, that's
Yeah. In the same way as
ugh,
like we're talking about trying to be able to talk about wrongs that someone has done without defining them as bad,
yeah.
um, that that discourse is going to be important for our future as humans.
Mhm.
um, and that made me think of another thing from How to Be an Anti-Racist, which was that Ibram X. Kendi says that white supremacists are the ones who made the word racist a pejorative term. And because when you do that, it takes the emotion up immediately
Mhm.
and you cannot talk about it. And if you
Yeah.
can't talk about it, you can't discuss it, you can't heal from it, you can't repair. And so I feel like that's kind of something that's been done in terms of the prison system. We take it all the way up so fast that we don't have time to even consider alternatives.
Yeah. I think I want to cap the conversation of this book by going back to believe is really the core of the book is that Hari wants to reconnect with her inner child and went through like Harigora was lost at some point, right? Like he lost that child. And you read through the book of like, obviously like um very vivid events of how that child was lost for no fault of their own, obviously, just like kind of a product of certain situations. I think the main one is that there was an instance where he was a kid and with another like kid of his age, like they're like as like two boys like just expressing themselves, and the other boy just kind of tells their parents, and it obviously escalated and became kind of like a very like what is the word, like corporal, right? Like like child, what do you like,
Corporal
just like
punishment.
corporal punishment, yeah, like just like disciplining their child. And he talks about how his father kind of punishes him for it because boys don't do that, and that became such as like the very graphic thing. And even like in the contradiction quote that you just said, like that was a product of that. Like Hari's dad doesn't even remember that happened. um but it's that idea of like, it just made me think about, yeah, like the idea that a lot of uh definitely like queer kids growing up had to like be subject to like being beaten the gay away, or beating those things that may deviate you from what is the right path, and trying to like go back to their inner childhood and then find that child again, I think is something that even when I was reading them go through it, I was like, I haven't done that. I haven't sat down and actually thought about like what were the things in my childhood that made me kind of like speed up the process quickly, that I wasn't able to, just be a kid because there was really no opportunity in certain times. So I think the book really does a good job, a beautiful job of that journey. And I think that was my biggest takeaway, is that I loved watching them kind of slowly unwrap and unearth more stuff as they go deeper into their childhood and what, you know, may have caused losing them. So it made me like want to be like, should I start writing letters to like baby RJ of like, just to be like, what were these moments? I am curious though. Is this our first COVID? like book. Like this is I felt like this is the first time we read something that actively was like this is
Talking about
happening
it, I
during
think.
COVID. Yeah.
I think you're right. I have to say I was looking at some books to recommend for the next time, and there was one that was like specifically said that it talked about the pandemic. It was like a novel, and I was like, pass. I don't need to read about it. I'm still living it. Like
It's not done.
It's like that
I don't
meme.
know.
That meme, I'm so tired of living through historical moments.
Yeah, like
That
Yeah.
that's me.
I don't need to reflect on that right now because I'm still living in it.
It's like all the memes of like kids in 2078 reading their textbooks like, wow, this 2020 chapter is so long.
Oh God, help us all.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you, Catherine and Allie. I know this was a really tough conversation. I mostly because we literally read Mariah Carey's memoir right before this. And it is such a big
The
oh,
biggest
man.
contrast. Like
Yeah.
we went from one end of the spectrum to the complete opposite end.
Yeah. I will say, I mean, Hari and their partner, I was like, they are a sexy couple. I mean, I've never met these people, but the way they've described them, even like he said like, oh yeah, my pants ripped just like so that he could show off their thighs. I was like, that is peak gay New York move. Love it. The culture. But anyway, thank you so much for diving into Black Boy Out of Time. This was definitely a fascinating read, and if anyone is interested in kind of digging deep into those really deep intersectionalities, this is definitely a book that we would recommend. So, for our next book club,
I fear it's not going to get any lighter with this next book.
I wondered.
I think after this next book we need to just like pick fluff.
yes.
I got you. I
Okay,
got you.
perfect.
I'm gonna
Okay.
bring
Perfect.
Star Wars books. No,
Oh,
I
I
won't
love
make
it.
you
It's
read.
perfect. Okay,
I
okay,
won't make
okay.
you read Star Wars, but we'll find something.
Catherine will give the fluff. Catherine will be it'll be a
Perfect.
fluffy April because we're reading this next one for March, and then April will just April showers, so it'll be nice and fluffy. But before that,
We're gonna get a little bit sadder.
let's get a little bit sadder. We're gonna keep going by reading Invisible Child: Poverty, Survival, and Hope in an American City by Andrea Elliott. There's the book right here, and don't forget you can get a copy on thebookshop.org. Let me read the jacket copy, and then Allie talk a little bit about how you found this. So, Invisible Child follows 8 dramatic years in the life of Dasani Coates, a child with an imagination as soaring as the skyscrapers near her Brooklyn homeless shelter. Born at the turn of the century, Dasani is named for the bottled water that comes to symbolize Brooklyn's gentrification and the shared aspirations of a divided city. As Dasani grows up, moving with her tight knit family from shelter to shelter, this story goes back to trace the passage of Dasani's ancestors from slavery to the Great Migration North. By the time Dasani comes of age, New York City's homeless crisis is exploding as the chasm deepens between rich and poor. In the shadows of this new Gilded Age, Dasani must lead her 7 siblings through a thicket of problems: hunger, parental drug addiction, violence, housing instability, segregated schools, and the constant monitoring of the child protection system. When, at age 13, Dasani enrolls at a boarding school in Pennsylvania, her loyalties are tested like never before as she learns to code switch between the culture she left behind and the norms of her new town. Dasani starts to feel like a stranger in both places. Ultimately, she faces an impossible question: what if leaving poverty means abandoning the family you love?
I came across this I think it's because I think I came across the story series when the book was being published.
Mm-hmm.
But the origins of the book come from a series of long form articles that were written for the New York Times that took a look
Nice.
at poverty and homelessness in New York City. And I was really struck in reading those of how clear of a portrait that they offered of all of the issues that were mentioned, and just the insight that was provided, that again it's bringing to light a story that probably would normally never be told. So I wanted to get the full view of it in the book. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's weird to say I'm excited to read it, but I think it will be a really, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting read.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like how you feel afterwards too, of like how it translates when it is just one long form that you can just track, a story. So yeah, well, The Invisible Child, you can grab a copy of it and all of the books we've read here in the Ampliverse book club at the Ampliverse bookshop. And if you purchase a book there, it not only helps the Ampliverse, but also helps a local bookstore in your area. So you can go to the link down below, bookshop.org/shop/the Ampliverse. Thank you for watching or listening along to the Ampliverse Book Club. You can find and follow us on social media at the Ampliverse on Twitter and Instagram. And we can keep the conversation going across the Ampliverse by joining the Discord server as well. It's linked on the episode. Finally, if you love the show and others we do here, and if you feel obliged to tip $1 or $2, you can do that on our Ko-fi linked on this episode, which helps keep the light on in our universe. Allie, Catherine, thank you so much. This is a beefy book, but I think we're showing off our chops that we can handle it. So
Yeah.
excited to dive into more. Thank you so much for joining our book club, and we will see you next month. Until then, read on. Bye.
Bye.
Discovering voices, building worlds. The Ampliverse.